Chase Thomas podcast. My nephew needs me to record. See, I already hate it. I hate it.
All right, hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Chase Thomas Podcast, where I'm still the aforementioned Chase Thomas, coming to you live from Knoxville, Tennessee, Everything School HQ, up there in
New York City.
It's one of my favorites. It's a great bit. Fangraphs Zone. Oh no! Formerly Fangraphs Zone, not Fangraphs, as you can see. This is going to take me some time. I've been doing that for years now, John Taylor, that I've realized that I'm going to do that for a little bit. I'm going to have to really work on this.
I still think I work at Fangraphs sometimes. I wake up in the morning, I open our CMS, and I'm like, wait, no, I don't have to do this anymore. And then I try to edit articles anyway, because it's force of habit. But yes,
now you're editing trains.
Now I'm editing the trains. But yes, I am not Fangraphs now.
No. But look, we still love Fangraphs. This is still Take Graphs, a Major League Baseball show each and every week on this very feed. John Taylor, don't forget, folks, every single week on this show, year round, even when the hot stove is not hot whatsoever, we are still talking Major League Baseball here on the Chase Thomas Podcast. Here on YouTube, the YouTube show has been doing great each and every week here as we get through the grind of the off season. Here, we're in the quietest part of the MLB calendar. Still a while before pitchers and catchers reporting and everything else wrapping up in terms of trades and free agents and this, that, and the other. But each and every week. So if you're a fan of this very show and you're watching us on YouTube, first say great, and we appreciate it. Make sure you give us a like and a subscribe if you like watching each and every episode here on the YouTube show. You can also check us out on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you like and subscribe, and leave us a 5-star rating and write us a review on your preferred podcast player. It helps other people find the show, and it helps this very show continue to grow. You can also email us with any future MLB questions you might have for John or myself at chasethomaspodcast@gmail.com. Love to hear from you guys, or comment below in this very video. John Taylor, Take Graphs, take of the week, good sir. What have you in store for us this week?
What is wrong with the off season? Like, and this is, I should say, like, we've now had a few years for a variety of reasons where the off season and free agency is just kind of slow, and sometimes that gets upended, like during the lockout off season when we had all of free agency happen in the span of roughly 2 hours. But even now, going as far back as the Manny Machado, Bryce Harper off season, we've really gotten to a point where free agency just doesn't move, and not just doesn't move, but and this off season in particular, no one seems to be spending whatsoever beyond the Dodgers, and maybe a couple other teams, but really just the Dodgers. We have not really seen a whole lot of movement. If you look at and I'll keep plugging Fangraphs forever because I love them and they do great work. But if you look at our the 2024 transaction tracker, or not the transaction tracker, I'm getting it all wrong. The off-season tracker, maybe not even the off-season tracker. Let's find something better than that. Here's our 2024 free agent tracker. I'm going to do that forever. They're still available right now. Jordan Montgomery, Cody Bellinger, Blake Snell, Matt Chapman, Marcus Stroman, Brandon Belt, Mike Clevenger, JD Martinez, Jorge Soler, Adam Duvall, Tommy Pham, Aroldis Chapman, Teoscar Hernandez, Josh Hader, on and on and on. And while we've had a handful of top free agents signed, obviously Shohei Ohtani's off the board, obviously Yoshinobu Yamamoto's off the board, and a couple of middle-tier pitchers, the Seth Lugos, Michael Wacha's, Lucas Giolito's of the world. Particularly, we haven't seen hitters get signed. Mitch Garver, Lourdes Gurriel Jr., I believe so far Heimer Candelario, are the only 3 hitters so far to get a longer than 1 year deal in this free agency period. That's it. Everyone else has been, every other hitter who signed, and there have not been many of them either, has been a simple 1 year deal. And I guess there are 2 ways you could look at it. One is that, as we've talked about before, this is not a great free agency period for hitters in particular. Aside from kind of top of the market pitchers, there wasn't a whole lot else available. Josh Hader's really about the only elite closer, even top tier closer available. From him, you're drifting on down to Craig Kimbrel, who's already signed. Beyond that, it's David Robertson. Maybe if you still think there's anything left in that arm. But at the same time, it is so strange to me, again, that it just doesn't feel like, it feels like a lot of these teams that aren't moving, or, better said, noting that the Dodgers have been the busiest, most active team in the offseason free agency. Behind them is probably the Royals. I don't think it's really a good sign for an offseason or for free agency when the Royals are one of the most active, highest spending teams. And which is not to crap on the Royals. Kudos to them for actually doing stuff.
Well, let's pause for a second there. For the good folks who have no earthly idea what you're talking about, John Taylor, in terms of an active Kansas City Royals, what have the Kansas City Royals done to put them in that number 2 hole for you?
They've signed Seth Lugo and Michael Wacha.
Mm.
And Chris Stratton and Will Smith. I believe they have the most signings of any team so far.
Really?
It's that they have 4 signings. The Pirates have signed 4 players, although one of them was Jake Lamb to a minor league deal. The Mets have signed 4 players to guaranteed major league contracts, but all of them 1-year deals and except for Luis Severino, no more than $2 million. The Brewers have signed 4 players, but it's Wade Miley, Colin Ray, Eric Haas, and Joe Ross. The Dodgers have signed 4 to guaranteed contracts. The Angels have signed 3 players to guaranteed contracts. The Royals, as I said before, have signed 7. They've signed quite a few. I forgot Garrett Hampson and Mike Trout clone Hunter Renfroe. The Tigers have been semi-busy. Jack Flaherty, Kenta Maeda, Shelby Miller, Andrew Chafin, rebuilding the back of the rotation, their bullpen. The Reds have been relatively busy with Candelario, Nick Martinez, Emilio Pagan, and most recently Frankie Montas. The White Sox keep doing stuff, although I don't know if you really count Martin Maldonado and Paul DeJong. But regardless, and then the Braves, obviously, with their bullpen moves, I think it looks Arizona's been relatively busy, but getting Eduardo Rodriguez and bringing back Lourdes Gurriel. But for the most part, you don't see, and I think you probably can hear this, none of those teams necessarily, not none, but the great majority of those teams are not playoff teams. In terms of the teams we expect to see in the playoffs, the Blue Jays' entire offseason to date consists of Kevin Kiermaier and Isaiah Kiner-Falefa in terms of signings. The Rays have signed Chris Davinsky. That's it so far. The Cardinals have been busy, and they've signed Sonny Gray and Kyle Gibson and Lance Lynn. So there's at least one, but the Mariners have only signed Mitch Garver. The Giants have really only signed Jung-Ho Lee. The Yankees have signed all of 1 player so far this offseason, Billy McKinney, to a minor league deal. The Twins have signed 1 player, former Royals reliever Josh Stomont. The Red Sox have signed Lucas Giolito and not a whole lot else. The Cubs have signed 1 single player this offseason, Jorge Alfaro, to a minor league deal. Cleveland has signed 1 player to a guaranteed contract, Austin Hedges, who is basically the Jeff Mathis of our times. I mentioned the Braves, but you'll notice also some teams that are missing there. The Phillies have not made a guaranteed major league signing. They have Aaron Nola, but beyond
I was going to say Nola counts, yeah.
Yeah, I forgot about that, but they have not signed anything beyond that. I mentioned the Cubs have not been particularly busy. The Orioles do not have a single guaranteed major league signing on the books so far this offseason. I'm sorry, that's incorrect. They have Craig Kimbrell. Why do I keep getting this wrong? Doesn't matter. Either way, again, we're not seeing a whole lot of movement, though. Again, and especially from division winners. Baltimore has made 1 move. The Twins have made 1 move. The Rangers, which granted, the Rangers did their work a few off seasons ago, but they have not really done much of anything so far this offseason. With the exception of a deal I like, incentive-laden for Tyler Mahle, but still, that's about it so far. Like I said, the Rays have not done much of anything. The Yankees, granted, they traded for Juan Soto, but they have not been active in free agency. And all of these are teams that could use the help that's still out there. Every one of these teams could use Blake Snell or Jordan Montgomery. The great majority of them could use Cody Bellinger. The majority of them could use Matt Chapman in some capacity or another. I know that for a lot of those teams, those are either imperfect fits or very expensive fits. But it is wild to me in this day and age how little free agency seems to be a thing that matters at this point. And some of that is just the sheer, or not the sheer, but just the logistical realities of free agency, which is that you are perpetually, with the exception of unicorns like Ohtani or Yamamoto, you're getting guys who are 30 or on the wrong side of 30, who are looking for in most cases, their first major payday. And so you're putting out a pretty large outlay for guys that, for the most part, are not going to quote unquote earn that deal in its entirety. It's going to be a lot of it's going to be the production is going to be front loaded, the cost is going to be somewhat back loaded, and so I think you're seeing, and with the fact that more and more teams, I think front office wise at this point behave in pretty much the same ways, they've all, I think, seemingly come to the conclusion that free agency just isn't worth the juice. And I
Mm,
can understand that from a financial, like just in terms of just financial efficiency perspective. That's not the best way to use your money. But it does kind of worry me going forward because free agency historically, in its existence, has been the main way that players get paid, or at least paid
mm,
on a scale that is appropriate relative to their production. Because we haven't really seen that money trickle down in terms of, and maybe to a certain degree, but not in terms of arbitration, not in terms of long-term deals signed before then. The free market, which as any red-blooded capitalist will tell you, the free market is where you make the most money because you are unencumbered by any limitations, so to speak. But if teams
mm,
are just going to treat free agency as essentially a waiting period, and I think the Ross Atkins, the Blue Jays general manager, talked to the press today, either today or yesterday, I can't remember, and basically spelled it out as that the part of the Blue Jays strategy is just to wait some of these guys out, to
mm,
wait until they get desperate enough to a point to sign a smaller deal than they would have been expecting to try to make it more financially viable for the club, which
mm.
fair strategy. That's how the Blue Jays want to run their business, and that's how pretty much every team wants to run their business. They want to get the most
Unless you're the
dollar,
Dodgers.
unless you're the Dodgers. But and that's kind of part of the point too. Is like there is value to just saying no. We're just going to sign the guy. Granted, the Dodgers have all
Mm,
the money in the world, but they also went out and used it properly by signing the two best players available to make themselves better. It's not a good sign, I think, for baseball's overall either fiscal health or competitive health if free agency becomes this just kind of withered appendage when it comes to adding players. If every team is operating in the same way, which is to say, not spending the money, trying to wait these guys out, because then it raises the question, well, when are these guys going to get paid exactly? Which
mm.
brings up all the other issues that have been percolating under the surface and not just under the surface, but fully in view for every last CBA negotiation, the two most recent ones and the one we'll get anew in 2026. Not too far away now. We are only 2 years away from the expiration of that CBA, so get ready for that fun again. So
Well,
it
can I
does,
ask you this, John?
yeah.
Because I was
Yeah.
listening to the good guys over there at Just Baseball yesterday,
Hmm.
riding around, and they made a good point where I hadn't really considered this. Is like, I wonder how much of this is like, because Cody Bellinger, we've talked about in this program, and where he's a good fit, and this, that, and the other, and he's a good player. Like, Cody Bellinger could help a lot of teams. But Cody Bellinger, it looks like, is going to have a higher AAV if you sign him than what Bryce Harper is going to make in 2024. And I wonder if that just like because of the nature of where the money is and how much just the money has changed in the last, I don't know, when did Bryce Harper agree to that deal? How long ago was that, John?
That was the 2019 offseason, I believe.
Okay. And that's just a lot of change very quickly. So I wonder how much of it, like with ownership groups and stuff like that, to get them to sign off. They're like, you want us to pay how much a year for Cody Bellinger when Bryce Harper is making X and he's an NL MVP guy? He's someone who moves the needle in terms of winning a title. Like, I wonder how much of it is just that. It's just the price tag jumps so much for guys that don't move the needle because so many of these guys are not, Shohei Ohtani's in the scale. Like, Blake
It
Snell, great
was before the
pitcher.
2019,
Okay.
before the 2019 season, for the record.
Okay. Does that make sense? But I hadn't really considered it. And I thought that was an interesting thought of just like maybe that being part of it. It's like Cody Bellinger is going to make more money than Bryce Harper based on what he signs this year.
Yeah, and I mean some of this is, and we've seen it throughout the offseason so far, that a lot of these deals have had like the super high AAV figures in the beginning, and then the money's all front loaded because they want to try to pay less down the road. Obviously, you saw that too with Otani's deal, which has a huge chunk of it deferred into the future. I, I ultimately just think though that teams and ownership have finally come to a common ground because remember, ownership has never been in favor of free agency. Ownership fought free agency the whole way. There have been
Mm-hmm.
numerous collusion scandals among ownership since the advent of free agency. The 1994 strike was in large part because owners wanted to institute some form of salary cap and wage controls that the MLBPA rightfully said absolutely no way. Ownership has always been against free agency. Now they also have on their side the fact that the great majority of front offices don't really think free agency is the way to operate either, because again, you're
Mm-hmm.
signing guys at the wrong age. And it should be noted too, of the guys available this season or in this offseason, and with some exceptions, uh, all on the wrong side of 30. Otani Bellinger actually at 28 is one of the exceptions. Yamamoto obviously at 25, Jung-Ho Lee at 25. Everyone else pretty much on either at 30 or on the wrong side of it. These are not investments these teams want to make, which part of this too is that every front office is now essentially run like a hedge fund or like a financial institution, where it's not so much about what the player can do for you today, it's about what's it going to cost to have him tomorrow. And I think, like I said, that is just not good for the overall health of the sport, because what you're seeing is teams that should be in a position, because of where they are in their own contention cycle, to make a big move, to make a big addition that improves or reinforces their postseason odds or their championship odds, instead choosing to stay put and let things try to play out in a more financially efficient manner, which, again, great if you own the Chicago Cubs or the Toronto Blue Jays and you want a bigger return on investment. Not great if you're a Cubs or Blue Jays fan and your team is just sitting completely still, letting a potential contention window close all that much more because you don't want to spend. So and I've railed about this before. I've railed about this plenty, that a large problem in baseball right now is teams do not want to spend, with exceptions like the Dodgers. And even then, the Dodgers would not have done the Shohei Ohtani deal were he not Shohei Ohtani, which I know sounds obvious, but more to the point, he is a very special player. He is unique, like in both his abilities and where he entered the market. Same with Yamamoto, and to a lesser degree, same with Jung-Ho Lee. You know, those guys do not, usually 25 and under players do not become available on the free agent market, and especially not at the level of talent those guys operate at. So, you know, it just worries me going forward that this does not seem to be something, you know, in past cold off seasons, cold stove times, you know, we said, oh, but the lockout, or, oh, but, you know, maybe it's just not a good free agency period. But no, this just seems to be at this point, I think it just is the new normal for how free agency operates, which is to say the big guys get their money. Everyone else just kind of is forced to sit around and wait. And again, I don't really think that's good for the game. You know, kudos to the Tigers and the Royals and other, you know, and the Reds for actually making moves. But at the same time, there's more that can be done. I think, you know, I saw the Reds general manager, Nick Krall, saying that the Reds are done with their major moves for the offseason. And to me, it's like, what major moves? You signed Heimer Candelario and Nick Martinez and Emilio Pagan. That counts as major moves now? When you have other like Blake Snell would make a ton of sense for the Cincinnati Reds. So would Jordan Montgomery.
Do you think Blake Snell would want to go to the Reds?
If you offer him enough money, I'm sure he would. At the end of the day, like, free agents can't control everything, and like they can say yes or no to teams, but if you only have one team offering you the money, which, and I know that's also part of this is it. Look, this is not, and it's not to say owners are colluding, but this is essentially a kind of informal, borderline accidental collusion, because again, every team in front office operates more or less the same way, and they've all, you know, not even come to the conclusion, but all accepted the idea that, hey, free agency isn't worth it. We should not be spending our money here unless there is an Ohtani level talent available. And even then, like we saw back with Harper and Machado, like we've seen in offseason since, and as we saw with Ohtani, even that's not enough to motivate some teams. Even the presence of arguably the best player any of us will ever see is not enough to get some teams to spend. So, I don't know how you change that. I know there's been talk or discussion about, you know, a salary floor, or about some kind of hard roster move deadline in terms of an end to free agency, as opposed to letting it continue indefinitely into the start of the season. You know, I don't think that solves anything necessarily. I think it might create more problems than it fixes. You know, there's, to say nothing of, you know, I don't necessarily like the idea of there being limits and encumberments upon the free agency system, but it's pretty clear that free agency as it exists now is in a state that is neither beneficial toward the players, except for the elite, nor is it beneficial for fans when contending teams like the Cubs, like the Blue Jays, like the Yankees are just content to sit it out completely. Like even the Mets, like, again, all the most money they've handed out this season or this offseason is $13 million for a 1-year deal to Luis Severino, who was awful last season. You know, this is a team owned by a literal billionaire, and yet they are not out there making the kind of moves you would expect with that. And I can't see how that's a good thing overall for the sport or for the health of the sport, particularly from a competitive perspective.
I wanted to do an experiment and double check something, because my instinct was this is the case. Guess how many of the 1 through 9 for the Braves in 2024, guess how many of them were acquired by a free agency?
I'm gonna say 1 at the max, but I don't even know who it would be.
0.
See, I was gonna say it's either 1 or 0. I just couldn't remember if Ozuna had signed as a free agent or if he'd been in trade.
Trade. So you look at Ozuna, Acuna, Michael Harris, Jared Kalenic, Arcia, who was traded 2 years ago, and a deal with the Brewers, Austin Riley, Ozzy Albies, Matt Olson, Sean Murphy in a trade. That's it.
And I think,
and I wonder if that's part of it, is like teams are just going draft, and then if they don't want to do that, then they're like, I wonder if free agency is just the last ditch effort where a lot of yeah.
I think that's what's happening, and I think a lot of teams see the Braves as the model going forward. You develop from within, you acquire from without when guys are still early in their careers, when they are both not expensive, and also when you can try to lock them down on cheaper long-term deals, like the one the Braves gave Acuna, or like the offensive one they gave Ozzy Albies, or even a deal like Matt Olson's, which certainly is, 9-figure outlay, but at the same time, Matt Olson in free agency theoretically would and should get more than that. So yeah, I think everyone wants to be the Braves in that sense. They want to acquire a core while it's young, extend it in place, not have to deal with free agency. And if a player does reach free agency, as Max Fried is going to next offseason, ideally you already have a replacement in-house ready, so you don't have to take part in the open bidding. Again, that is
the Braves don't, by the way, just as a heads up, folks. I don't think the Braves have an in-house option.
No, I mean, look at the fact that every move they've made this offseason, more or less, with the exception of signing a couple of relievers in Reynaldo Lopez and oh no, was Joe Jimenez already there? Either way,
he was already there, yeah.
So Pierce Johnson is the guy I'm thinking of. Aside from signing a couple of relievers, every move they've made otherwise has been some form of trade because, and I think largely because, they don't want to spend the extra money through free agency, and I think, which has worked out fine for them. I think, the major moves they made, Kalenic, Aaron Bummer, and Chris Sale, I think are all fine, and they probably would not necessarily have gotten more at that same price point in free agency. But I think it's also telling that they'd rather do that than, say, give Blake Snell $25 million a year for the next 6 years.
Yeah.
I think, I guess that is kind of the thing, is like that form of free agency seems to be on the way out. You're still going to get elite guys signed to their deals. Blake Snell is still going to get a long-term deal at some point. So is Jordan Montgomery. So is Cody Bellinger. So is Matt Chapman. So is Josh Hader. But it is not, like you said, the way that teams are built, I think the model now is Atlanta, which I think is especially funny too. And not that Texas did it entirely through free agency, but again, given how Texas in large part acquired a huge chunk of its World Series winning roster through free agency, including mega deals for Marcus Semien and Corey Seager. It's funny. It's a copycat league, but there's also more than one way to build a winner. And I do think that neglecting free agency the way a lot of teams have is going to prove to be a detriment overall. Again, all it costs is money. And if there's one thing every baseball team has loads and loads of, it's money. Everyone has it.
Absolutely, John Taylor. Well, speaking of the Braves, this is a natural transition, John Taylor, because our teams did a deal since we last recorded a podcast, John Taylor.
The last Braves-Red Sox trade?
Was it a Frank Grin era type deal? Are we going back to Frank Grin? Was it? I'm trying to think. Would it be not Derek Lowe? Would it be? I think JD Drew.
I'm looking up, just because now I want to answer my own question. I'm looking up, and this is a tool you can find on Baseball Reference, Trade Partners tool, which will tell you all trades made between two franchises. So before this trade we're going to talk about, the Braves acquired Hoy Park from the Red Sox for a player to be named later. So not really. The last major trade between these two teams, Casey Kotchman for Adam LaRoche back at the trade deadline in 2009.
Wow.
Before that, and this is probably the most major trade in the past, Edgar Renteria for Andy Marte back in 2005.
Okay.
And before that, you have to go all the way back to 1995 at the July 31st trade deadline. Mike Stanton to the Red Sox for Mike Jacobs and Mark Lewis. These deals don't really happen. I mean, the best one in here, Tom House for Roger Murray. That's a pretty good one. That's really, I think it probably is either the Casey Kotchman, Adam LaRoche trade or the Edgar Renteria, Andy Marte trade. It's the biggest trade in Red Sox Braves history. But
Well, there you go.
maybe the Chris Sale trade now will beat them all out.
I think it might, John. Well, it's all you don't see many moves where it's like this is just a full on playoff move. Like this is just a full on like the Braves have no like, hey, we need 20 because I think did Chris Sale get 20 starts last year?
Something along those lines. I don't even know if he made that many. I'm gonna guess it's probably closer to 15 if he made that many.
Okay. But either way, he pitched more than I think people realize, and it's because of what it's been
He
like
made
the last 3.
He made exactly 20 starts. Look at you.
Oh, awesome. Okay. Well, that's the thing. It's like that's pretty good. If he gets anywhere around that in 2024, that's cool. But it was interesting to read the fallout and the back and forth and what this trade means for both teams. But let's start on the Boston side because that is where you are both a fan of and more familiar with in knowing what the new president, Mr. Breslow, is thinking here. But I thought maybe the most fascinating thing to me, and maybe this is something you could touch on too, is that like the plan is for Vaughn Grissom to be the everyday second baseman in 2024, which I don't know if that's going to happen. That's a bold move because I watched a lot of Vaughn Grissom at shortstop to start this past year, and that did not go well. And I thought if he was going to be an everyday player, which I think is always going to be hard for Vaughn Grissom in Major League Baseball, I thought it would be in the outfield for him, potentially left field. But the fact that he is going to get the opportunity to start every day at second base for the Red Sox in 2024 kind of raised an eyebrow for me a little bit in terms of that being the plan for Boston. But what say you, John Taylor? Why did the Red Sox do this? And what do you think about Vaughn Grissom as the everyday second baseman for Boston?
So the Red Sox did this I think for two reasons. One is that Chris Sale, whatever he would provide, and I'm going to put the cap of that at like 120 mostly fine innings, just isn't that valuable to a Red Sox team that is probably not going to be a playoff contender. They're just not only that, but even if you assume, okay, well, hold on to him during the season and try to move him at the deadline for who does need pitching, yeah, you can't count on Chris Sale being healthy for that to work. That is a tough plan to make. And I think, too, to some degree, not being able to plan for or around Chris Sale, not really knowing how his health is going to hold up, what he's going to be able to give you, I think complicates your ability, if you're the Red Sox, to make rotation plans beyond him. And I think you saw that literally play out in the way the team signed Lucas Giolito and then immediately went and traded Sale. I think the plan there was that they no longer wanted Sale in the rotation and would get pretty much whatever they could for him. But I think in Grissom, the Red Sox have had a seriously hard time in the last pretty much since Dustin Pedroia retired, trying to find a even competent body to stand in at second base for any reasonable stretch of time. I don't know if Grissom is that. He's a good bat to ball hitter. He's got good contact skills. There's not a lot of power in his bat. It's good speed, but as you've said with his defense, it's very iffy. He clearly couldn't handle shortstop. I'm not 100% convinced on his ability to handle second base, but he's got three things going for him. He is young, he is cheap, he is under team control for the next 5 seasons at the very least. So if nothing else, Boston can take this gamble, particularly when you consider, too, that if you look at the free agent market for second baseman, there really was not and is not a whole lot out there. We were talking about guys like Whit Merrifield as options there, or Tim Anderson, and that's about as bad as it gets, to say nothing of the fact that not only is that as bad as it gets, but you're also probably out some $10 million if you do that to get a guy who's probably not even going to put up a one WAR season. If Grissom gives you a one WAR season, that's not great, but if all it costs you is $700,000, there are worse ways to spend that money. You're not really out much of anything at all. So I think in that sense, a Boston team that's trying to cut payroll and is also trying to find some kind of long-term, or at least either long-term solution or short-term gap covering, it makes sense for them to add Grissom, especially in a guy in Sale who does not really make sense with their plans. What I find a little odd is that they would swap out essentially Sale for Giolito, when I think there's probably a better bet that Sale is more productive. Not as many innings, which I think is important because Boston is really low on starting pitching depth, and I think they probably prefer having the stability of knowing that Giolito will give you probably 160 to 180 innings if he stays healthy, whereas Sale, again, I really can't see him getting over 120. His arm is just not the same as it was anymore. The thing with Giolito, though, is, or with Sale, rather, he only had 1 year left on his contract. Giolito, they had to sign for 2, or they signed for 1 with an option. Giolito can opt out after the first season, or he can opt in after the first season obviously depending what he chooses to do. So if Giolito has a bad 2024, he's almost certainly going to opt into 2025. If he's a Red Sox, we stuck with 2 years of a bad pitcher as opposed to 1 year of potentially a bad pitcher and then letting him walk. But again, I think some of that is just having the kind of comfort of, well, at least even if Giolito gives you bad innings, at least there are more of those innings, so we don't have to give them to the likes of Brandon Walter or Chris Murphy. And I think it makes sense ultimately. Like I said, the upside, it's all about the upside play in Grissom and the opportunity to get at least league average production at second base, which the Red Sox haven't had in seemingly forever for a very low sum of money. Opening up more rotation space too, I think, if they want to see what some younger guys like Tanner Houck can do. So I think it does make sense from that respect. And I think on the other side for Atlanta, like you said, it really is all about what Sale can do when October rolls around if he's healthy, because clearly the Braves do not give the tiniest of a crap about what a fifth starter does during the regular season, because clearly they believe, and with good reason, that a fifth starter simply does not matter during the regular season. Or better said, not doesn't matter, but that his performance is less important than what he can theoretically do in October. And so,
yeah, you're the best team in baseball, and you're throwing out Dylan Dodd sometimes, Bryce Elder sometimes, AJ Smith-Shawver sometimes. It doesn't matter.
They turned Bryce Elder into an all-star. Like, that's kind of the other thing with Atlanta is they've got the resources to get the best out of Chris Sale. And even if all they get is 120 innings out of him, they can still backfill what's left with other. I mean, I imagine the hope is that, assuming Sale can give them like 120 or so innings, you fill the rest ideally with guys like AJ Smith-Shawver or Hurston Waldrep if he's ready. Or you just see, hey, maybe one of our minor league guys just takes a really huge step forward randomly and becomes a dude like Dylan Dodd or Darius Vines. Like maybe one of those guys just randomly unlocks something, or we unlock something with him. And then we don't really need to worry about Sale only giving us 100 plus innings.
Well, I think the other part of it too is that they brought Morton back, right?
Yes.
I think this screams to me, they believe here's what this screams to me more than anything, is I think they look at it as if Fried's healthy, if Strider's healthy, all we need is one of these two main veterans to be healthy, and we can win the World Series. We can win any 7-game series where they're just like, I don't care if it's Morton, I don't care if it's Sale. One of those two, we're going to bank on one of those two being good enough, healthy enough in the postseason to carry that 3-man group, and we can piece everything else together. Is my gut.
And that makes perfect sense. For the Braves, what matters isn't the quantity of innings, but the quality. And like you said, particularly when you get to October, especially because by that point, all you're asking Morton and or Sale to do is get through a lineup twice.
Right.
Because then, and that's where Atlanta's real strength comes in, which is we have 90 relievers, all of whom are good and who can pitch the last 4 innings of any game in existence. So long as Morton or Sale can get you through 5 innings, that's pretty much all you need. So I think I like the deal more for Atlanta than I do for Boston. So long as the Braves don't plan on wearing throwback uniforms anytime soon. Or so long as, the vaccine is not a requirement, although I'm pretty sure Sale did get jabbed at some point, so that's probably not an issue anymore. But yeah, I think I like it more for Atlanta. I think it fits just better with what they've been doing. The other part of it too is with Boston paying down a chunk of Sale's salary and with some of it being deferred, they're not really paying all that much for him. You look at if you pull up we're going to have,
because he was going to get $27 million this year, and then how much is Boston paying of that $27 million?
I believe about $17 million of that is being paid by the Red Sox. So yeah, Chris Sale
to just not be there.
Chris Sale's salary for 2024 will be essentially $500,000, given how much the Red Sox are paying and how much of it is deferred into the future. You're not going to do better than that on the open market. In a market where Seth Lugo is pulling down $15 million a year, where Michael Wacha is getting $16 million a year, and where those guys are all not just pulling down that AAV, but also a multi-year deal for 2 or 3 years. That's Atlanta using its roster depth, which Grissom represents, to get the best possible deal it can on a guy whose upside is way more than $500,000. I think the only thing you worry about with the Braves at this point is they don't really have a bench anymore. Like they just straight up don't have one. I think. Like, who is the backup infielder currently on this team? It's David Fletcher or Lurie Garcia. That's not where you want to be.
All I know is Fletcher off the top of my head. Let me see.
Well, looking at roster resource, they've got the bench as
Forrest Wall.
Yeah, and look, I understand too with the Braves, the bench matters less because if everyone's healthy, Brian Snitker is not changing this lineup except for flipping in one of Murphy or d'Arnaud, depending on what day it is or potentially who's pitching. And also, if a guy like Acuna or Albies goes down for an extended period of time, it's not as if Vaughn Grissom or Braden Shoemake or anyone else that they've dealt away was going to be some dude who could step in and immediately replace that production. That just was not a realistic option. And I also think it is probably easier for Atlanta to backfill that bench kind of spot with the kind of cheap veterans who do exist, like a Whit Merrifield or, I mean, here, I'll just pull up again our 2024 free agent tracker to see who's available in the infield. Still available as potential middle infield possibilities who are probably come for cheap. Whit Merrifield, Donovan Solano, Elvis Andrus, well, don't go to Rougned Odor. Brandon Crawford is a possibility as well. Gio Urshela.
Not sure he's handsome enough.
Adam Frazier, Ahmed Rosario, Tony Kemp, Nick Ahmed.
I think Tony Kemp's from here. Am I misremembering?
I'm surprised.
Tony Kemp feels like a Brave. He's from here.
How is that not happening?
Oh, he's from Franklin, Tennessee. Yeah, he's not far. That's Braves country.
Tim Anderson, as previously mentioned, as another option. You can find those guys, and I imagine the Braves will eventually add one or two of those guys for maybe like $3 or $4 million a pop. That's a better use of their resources than having to spend $12 million on Mike Clevenger, who is probably not going to outperform Chris Sale on the whole. And again, Sale's only going to cost him $500,000. So
yeah,
I really like the deal for Atlanta. I think
there's no risk, and I think if you're like,
there's no risk for them ultimately.
And I think Braves fans may have been like, is that all you could get for Vaughn Grissom? And it's like, here's the problem. The Braves didn't have a lot of leverage with Vaughn Grissom at this point in the trade market. He also didn't have a spot. No. So he didn't have anywhere to play next year.
He wasn't going to take Ozzie Albies' spot, obviously. He clearly lost the shortstop battle to Orlando Arcia, who's I think at this point, it's very clearly a better player than I think he gets credit for at this point.
No, he's an everyday player. Like Orlando Arcia is an everyday player. Like you're keeping him around for next year.
And it's also worth noting, too, that even if Vaughn Grissom goes to Boston and spends the next 6 years playing as one of the better second basemen in the league, the Braves already have one of the better second basemen in the league.
Correct.
They do not need Vaughn Grissom. Vaughn Grissom's likeliest role in Atlanta was to be a super utility guy who probably spent a good chunk of the season at AAA. There's not a whole lot of value in that, even though it's cheap. You know, that is the kind of guy you can find on the free agent market for a few $1 million, especially someone where it's like, okay, well, maybe someone like Nick Ahmed doesn't have the offensive upside that Vaughn Grissom does, but he's a fantastic defensive shortstop, and that's what we need more than anything, A guy like Vaughn Grissom just did not really fit into the puzzle that is Atlanta's roster. I think he's a much better fit for Boston, even if he's not the ideal fit for Boston.
Well, I think, too, Vaughn, I think, is going to be in Major League Baseball for a long time, because what I do think, while I do think it's going to be hard to find an everyday position for him, and maybe he just doesn't have one, the hitting is real. Like, I don't think he's going to have a problem hitting at the major league level long term. I don't think he's going to be a big home run guy, but I do think he's going to be a high average guy for his whole career. Like, it would not surprise me if he bounces around this league for 15 years as a utility guy.
I can see him being a Jeff McNeil type. Maybe that's his ceiling, is a Jeff McNeil type. But
those guys are valuable.
That's plenty valuable. It just doesn't make sense for where Atlanta is.
Correct. With
their current roster. Chris Sale makes a lot more sense, especially because we talked before about how little Atlanta had really going on for it fifth starter wise. I mean, it was going to be Reynaldo Lopez to open the season. Behind him are guys like Dodd and Vines and Smith-Shawver. I think too, you like the stability that Sale brings in the sense that you know what you're going to get from him, even if you're not necessarily going to get a lot of it from him.
They also didn't want to clearly give up significant pieces for a guy like Dylan Cease when he was going to walk anyway, and you weren't going to pay him. So
yeah, and that's the other thing. I also don't know what that trade would have looked like for the Braves because and this is something I think we've talked about as well. That minor league system doesn't have a ton of depth to it. It's mostly a lot of lottery tickets right now.
Yeah,
and obviously we don't know what Chicago is looking for in any potential Cease trade. But I have to imagine, given the state of that roster, they want guys who are ready to play now for cheap, who they can, so they can at least put out a semi-competent team. It's not, they're probably not looking for 4 19-year-old A-ball prospects who might be there in 3 or 4 years' time. They need someone who's ideally going to help them in the near future or is ready to help and plug holes on the major league roster right now.
I agree, John. Speaking of Dylan Cease, though, I wanted to hit this. This might be our last topic for tonight. Buy or sell? Because I'm seeing this. I was reading an interesting piece about the Orioles, and you talked about how they've done nothing outside of the Kimbrel signing here. John Taylor's a team that broke through this year. Great young core. It's only getting better. Jackson Holiday on the way. But I ask you, sir, buy or sell? Orioles will trade for somebody like Dylan Cease or Jesus Luzardo, who they have been connected to this week. What do you think? Or do you think there are other appealing options for them? Because I think no matter what, they have to trade for an arm. Because we know they're not going to do it in free agency. Like, we just know that's not how they're going to do things. They have to trade for an arm. They have to go after somebody. Who do those two names make sense, or do you think they go somewhere else?
No, I think those names make sense because they are everything that Baltimore would theoretically want, which is someone who's going to be around for at least some decent amount of time. In that sense, it's probably, if I'm sure if you could if you know they could pick, it would probably be Luzardo over Cease, because like you said, this for Cease, and I'm just gonna double check this while I can. There's not a whole lot of team control left with Dylan Cease. He has this will be his second year of arbitration eligibility in 2024, which means he has 2 full seasons of team control left before he hits free agency. So, I mean, that's enough, I think, where a team like Baltimore would probably be comfortable bringing him in, particularly because Baltimore now has such a good reputation as a pitching development and pitcher improvement organization, that I think they could probably find some way to give him this, to find the stability for him that would make him the Cy Young caliber pitcher he was 2 years ago, as opposed to the walk-riddled mess he was last year. But I think, be it Cease or Luzardo, I think you're right. Baltimore has to do something to some level. I know that they're banking on a better season from Grayson Rodriguez after he got through his rookie season hiccups. I know Kyle Bradish looks like a much better pitcher now and looks like someone that they can genuinely rely on. They're going to have John Means back, ideally for the whole season after he came back from Tommy John surgery. You can do worse in the back of the rotation than Dean Kramer and Cole Irvin. But I think, as we talked about, barring that leap from Rodriguez or even another step forward from Bradish, there's not really the number one guy on that roster where you feel comfortable handing him the ball in game 1 of a postseason series. I think, with the right adjustments, that's Cease, that's Luzardo. And at the same time, Baltimore has more than enough prospects to make that kind of move. Looking at Fangraphs board prospect rankings 2023 updated, obviously they have Holiday, who we have, or again, I'm going to keep doing it, who is down as the number 1 overall prospect in baseball. But there's also Kobe Mayo, Joey Ortiz, and they are loaded with position players. Joey Ortiz, Heston Kjerstad, Colton Cowser, Connor Norby, Dylan Beavers, their most recent draft pick, Enrique Bradfield Jr., Judd Fabian, former Florida star back in 2022, Samuel Basallo, Frederick Ben Cosme. There is a ton of position player depth in the system, and I think that in particular would be really appealing to Chicago, especially because some of these guys, Ortiz, Kjerstad, Cowser, Norby, they are ready or very close to ready to being able to contribute at the major league level, which they'll be able to do in the next 6 years for relatively cheap. This isn't something where you'd have to be banking on lottery tickets. You can build something theoretically around, say, Ortiz, Judd Fabian, and maybe 2 arms somewhere further down in the system. And Baltimore can survive that. That's not a huge blow to Baltimore's prospect or farm system depth. They can live with that. So it really does just become a matter of, what do they think would they rather keep that powder dry for a different trade, maybe down the road? Is Cease the kind of guy they feel comfortable in? I mean, look, there's a possibility Baltimore's done its homework, looked at Cease and gone, you know what, too risky, don't feel good about trying to make that work. Chicago's asking price is too high, whatever it happens to be. But I do feel like there has to be something done with that rotation to add something in the form, not just in terms of a top-end arm, but also then to give you more depth at the bottom. Because as it stands right now, like I said, you've got Dean Kramer and Cole Irvin both in that rotation as the number 4 or 5 guys. And beyond that, there's, the Orioles, if there's one thing they have not really fully come around to developing, it's starting pitching depth. They've done great things with their position players, but pitching-wise, they've got the closest you've got to being a good or top prospect ready for the majors is Cade Povich, who is 24 years old, got to AAA last year. Looks like a good young pitcher, but certainly I don't think a guy that the Orioles are going to be trying to rush to the majors anytime soon. Beyond that, you've got guys who are more toward the bottom half of their farm system rankings. Povich is in the top 5, but after that we have guys anywhere from 17 to 35 in the rankings. Those aren't guys you expect to be impact arms. Nor do they really have anyone projected to come off the injured list this season who's going to be a help. Last year was the idea that, oh, John Means will be back at some point. That'll give us a rotation. That'll lengthen our rotation. He's back now. There's no one else really coming. There are no real reinforcements in the system. Assuming that they don't want to give the money necessary to get Blake Snell or Jordan Montgomery, which I think is still a realistic option, even though you said, no, the Orioles won't sign people, but all that costs is money, and the Orioles have endless amounts of payroll space.
But do you think they're going to do that? Does that feel like an Orioles move?
No, I think they would do it only if they could only if Snell, for example, were willing to do some short-term high AAV deal to try to get back on the market in a little bit. But I even then, I don't really know. So it's just kind of hard to tell what the Orioles are going to do because they just don't ever really seem to show any interest in doing anything in the first place. They seem committed to this idea of, we'll just let this young core gel and then we'll figure it out. But it's like, no, you need to be a little more aggressive with this. Real valuable major league contributors. Like right now, I say what you want about, whether Dylan Cease is an ace or something lesser than that. He can help you today far more so than I think a guy like Heston Kjerstad or Colton Cowser can, or Joey Ortiz or a number of other guys who are still at this point more potential than actual production. So I do think Baltimore will do something, or at least I think they should do something. And I think they would be able to do it without suffering too much in the process. But it's really anyone's guess at this point as to what they actually do, because they just don't, they really hug those prospects down there in the Charm City. They love them some prospects.
They do. I think the AL East is going to be so interesting. I think I'm more on your side going into next year. I keep saying next year. It's 2024 this year.
It is this year. Spring training starts in like 6 weeks.
Well, you know what?
We're so
Tennessee
close.
baseball's back in like 34 days, John Taylor.
Tennessee what now?
Baseball?
Tennessee baseball. I have not heard of this. This is new to me.
Mm-hmm. Manny Ramirez will be on our campus sooner rather than later.
That is really cool. They should hire him as the coach.
No, we need Vitello, but like as like we can find a role for Manny. Like I need him to make it to campus. I need him not to get drafted too high. Where I think Lucas is his name makes it to campus, because me being able to like just look over and Manny Ramirez is just sitting in Tennessee garb like 30 feet away from me as I'm watching a very cold Tennessee baseball game in like late February.
But he's also still wearing like a Hawaiian shirt or something.
Yeah, like just I can't wait to send that picture to you, John, and be like, what is life? You never know. You never know how things end up.
Gray dreadlocked Manny Ramirez is generally one of my favorite things too.
Yeah. Well, Bryce Harper lives here now. Bryce Harper is going to turn up at a Tennessee baseball game.
That's really funny to think about.
Yeah. I don't know, but like all that to say with the AL East, I think the Orioles are really betting on being able to run it back with their young core. They feel good about stuff. Jackson Holiday on the way. But you have a team like the Blue Jays in total like influx mode, where they just felt like I feel bad for the Jays, because if they don't get linked to Ohtani and the flight stuff doesn't come out and it doesn't look like they got left at the altar in the last minute and they got bamboozled, then we look at their offseason a little bit different, because that just took the wind out of their sails. And I think all Blue Jays fans are just kind of like, man, I thought we were getting Ohtani, and now we're really not doing anything. And I don't know if we're going to keep being good, even though we have Vlad Guerrero Jr., even though we do have Bo Bichette. We have a great core and we have spent well. I just feel like the Blue Jays fans don't have the warm and fuzzies.
I'll be out in a second.
Is just not.
Kristen, can you get
it's not
food?
Feeling great. And then you look at the Yankees, who trades for Juan Soto, and they're probably going to bounce back, I assume. And then you have the Red Sox, who I think I'm with you, where I think they're just going to be bad. And I think they're going to be the worst team. But then you have the Rays, who I have no idea what Tampa is going to look like. But we do this every year, where you and I have this conversation in our preseason of like, the Rays, like, are we sure they're not winning the division, even though everything points to the Rays falling off? I have no idea what the AL East is going to look like next year.
For the 80th straight offseason, I give up with the Rays. I don't know. I don't know. They're better and smarter than all of us. They don't have to do anything, because this will just happen in perpetuity. Like, I'll be on my deathbed, and the last thing I'll be muttering is, how are the Rays doing this shit? And then I'll croak, and that'll be the end of me. But and I think this goes back to what I was saying before. It's like, it is strange to me that the AL East, this rough and tumble, huge division, where you have any of these four teams, leaving the Red Sox out, who are realistic contenders, and yet none of them has really done much this offseason. Obviously, again, the
Mm.
Yankees got Soto. That's a huge move, and we can't understate that. But aside from that, it's been really quiet for these 4 teams so far. And
Yeah.
and like you said, I think some of that is just the perception of the Blue Jays as being spurned by Ohtani, as opposed to coming in second in a race where, in retrospect, it was really obvious who was gonna win that race. But at the same time, it has just been a weirdly quiet offseason in the AL East, and I think for Baltimore in particular, that's just so strange because you have this opportunity now with Tampa. Tampa's never going to be a big player in free agency. The Jays are just clearly waiting around for someone to fall into their price range. I think similarly with the Yankees, there seems to be a real hesitance to get involved in any kind of long-term deal at this point. The Red Sox are very much in a different position. They're clearly in some kind of rebuild period. Now is a real opportunity to go out and acquire the kind of difference-making piece that can boost your odds to win that division, avoid the wild card, maybe even get yourself the number 1 seed in the American League. And instead, they're just sitting around going, "Oh, I guess Craig Kimbrell," which they wouldn't have even brought in if Felix Bautista were healthy, which is obvious. But at the same time, it's been a very quiet offseason for everybody, and I just find that kind of strange that no one is trying to get that leg up on everyone else in a division where it might come down to 1 win, 2 wins, 3 wins, where that impact player, like a Blake Snell, like a Jordan Montgomery, like a Cody Bellinger, could easily swing the balance of the American League East.
I can't wait. I think it's going to be fun, and it's going to be a sneaky, really interesting division going into this season. It's going to take a while to get used to it being 2024, John Taylor. But
I'm still rating 23 on my checks. Checks.
Are you writing checks?
Yeah, you don't write checks. We all love writing checks. This thing we all still do in the year 2024.
I've never actually written a check.
You've never.
And I guess I never will. No.
Wow. You've never had anything where you've had to send in a check? When I got my passport renewed,
I've signed a lot of checks over the years.
Okay, look at you, Mr. Mark Cuban over here, Shark Tank.
It was more of like when I was growing up. Like, let me be perfectly clear. When I was a janitor back in the day, and I'm getting paid a paper check when I'm picking up my every other
you're
week
saying, so you're endorsing the check on the back.
Yes, I'm endorsing it. That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. No, but I guess they're look, you probably aren't the only thing you really need checks for, like I said, I think I had to make out a check when I got my passport renewed last year. Some government agencies, I think, still want to have a check in some capacity or another. But
I don't even know how to get a check. I don't know what to put on a check. I don't know.
Most of it is just you fill in. It tells you what to write for the most part.
I don't know. Seems a little daunting.
Millennials and millennials these days would rather eat avocado toast and binge Netflix and have pronouns than balance a checkbook.
Yeah.
Or send a fax.
Yeah.
Or have a job
Eat
for
red
15
meat
straight years.
Yeah.
A pension and a gold Rolex when they retire. Buy a house. Millennials don't even want to buy houses nowadays. What has gone wrong?
No, they want to rent. They don't want to. They want to make less.
They want to
pay more in rent.
They want to have worse health insurance. They want to have worse career prospects. What is wrong with America?
We'll leave it there, John Taylor. Not of Fangraphs.com, but we still will encourage good folks every single week on this show to go subscribe to Fangraphs.com, a very good Major League Baseball website, because they're still friends of the show here each and every week. So go check out the good folks over there and read all the great baseball coverage across the internet, but all kinds of great stuff. John Taylor, always a pleasure, my good sir, and I will talk to you next week.
Sounds good.